We love weapons. You know who else loves weapons? Rocket, of course.
I knew it.
Rocket would also love this video, since we are taking a look at 11 weapons that are more powerful in the comic books than their MCU counterpart.
I am inevitable.
First up, we have the Necrosword. Not only does the name for this weapon sound powerful and intimidating, but wouldn't you know it, it actually is. Way more so in the comics than in the MCU. For the sake of discussing this weapon, we are going to treat Hela's sword from Thor Ragnarok and Gor's sword from Thor Love and Thunder like they are the same, even though as far as we know, Hela's swords are not symbiotes.
Kneel before your queen.
The Necrosword was created by an ancient deity known as Null, and the Necrosword, or All Black, is the OG symbiote. That's all comic book lore, and other than a small little smudge left behind at a bar, there are currently no symbiotes in the MCU. Now, what about the immense destruction and power this weapon has?
Is that the Necrosword? That's cool. I've only ever read about it in stories.
And you know.
The Necrosword gives its wielder a power boost so massive that mortals could toss around chunks of the moon. It also bestows superhuman speed, flight, energy blasts, healing capabilities, and the ability to manipulate dark matter. The MCU version feeds off the wielder's life force, and that is not the case for the version in the comics. While Gorr was a formidable opponent for Thor with his lust for vengeance against the gods and his ability to lurk in the shadows, we still did not get to see the full force of the Necrosword, but hopefully we haven't seen the end of this destructive weapon. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings introduced us to... how many rings was it again? Oh yeah, 10 rings. Thanks. I don't know if I would have figured that out without you.
Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, you can hear me.
One of the key differences between the rings in the MCU and the rings in the comic books is in the comics they are actually rings that one would wear on their fingers. The armbands in the MCU are a nice aesthetic touch, but are not true to the comics. If we are being honest, they probably wanted to differentiate them from the Infinity Stones and the Gauntlet, which makes sense. Other than the minor aesthetic change, how else does the comic book version differ from the MCU?
You have the wrong guy. Does he look like he can fight?
Well, for one, the rings in the MCU all share the same power and are pretty straightforward energy weapons that can be fired individually as projectiles or create a force field. In the comics, each ring has its own unique ability, and they are utilized by the Mandarin. Each ring has a name: Remaker, Influence, Spin, Spectral, Nightbringer, Daimonic, Incandescence, the Liar, Lightning, and Ice. The abilities of some of the rings are pretty obvious given their name, but the rings with the more unique names have more unique abilities that feel like Dungeons & Dragons spells. Take Spectral for example. Spectral can fire a disintegration beam but has a 20-minute cooldown, and Nightbringer casts complete darkness around the user. Can anyone say, roll for initiative? Having a villain that is wielding 10 rings that each can control a different element and can also control the mind, looking at you, the liar, would make them ultra powerful and would require a decent amount of explanation that wouldn't fit nicely inside a 2-hour film. While it would be really awesome to see the comic version of the 10 rings, what we got in the MCU is still a pretty cool weapon. This next weapon is ultra spooky and ultra powerful and pretty flippin' evil.
Did you know there's an entire chapter devoted to you in the Darkhold?
The Darkhold is an ancient book of dark magic, and flipping through the indestructible pages can endanger the very soul of the person reading and utilizing its spells. There are many powerful spells and terrifying prophecies found within the pages of the book. In the MCU, there is an entire prophecy dedicated to the Scarlet Witch, and when the book was first introduced in WandaVision, it was unclear what role the Darkhold would play in the MCU. Thanks to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, we got to see just how deadly the Scarlet Witch can become after spending some time studying the book and utilizing its powers. The comic book counterpart is linked directly to an elder god named Chthon, and serves as a conduit for his power and has several prophecies discussing the god's return to Earth. Chthon blessed the Scarlet Witch with chaos magic, making her a key part in his plan to return to Earth. We saw the Scarlet Witch fully corrupted by the Darkhold by playing on her deep emotions of loss and jealousy. But what else could this book offer as far as spells go? Well, it can bring dimensions together and can even establish footholds on Earth for those dimensions. It can also summon demonic beings like hellhounds, a mist that can dissolve human bodies, and genies that grant corrupt wishes. The Darkhold is also responsible for the creation of vampires in the comic universe. Some other spells of note that we have seen in the comics are enchantments that allow werewolves to retain their human consciousness, a mastery of the 4 elements, and a spell that boosts psychic abilities by absorbing the mental energy of everyone in the immediate vicinity. Unfortunately, well, maybe it's fortunate, the Darkhold was presumably destroyed in the MCU, but Doctor Strange did gain that third eye, which is the same one the evil Doctor Strange had, and our Doctor Strange only obtained the eye after using the Darkhold, so maybe the good Doctor Strange is now a placeholder for the Darkhold in evil dimensions? Only time will tell. The Twilight Sword was wielded by Surtur in Thor Ragnarok, and we all saw the destruction that weapon can wreak. I mean, it literally fulfilled the Ragnarok prophecy. Obviously, in order to destroy an entire planet and bring about the end of an entire civilization, the Twilight Sword is no ordinary weapon even within the MCU. In the comics, the Twilight Sword, also known as the Sword of Doom, is a magical sword that can manipulate large amounts of mystical energy, such as destroying dimensional barriers, and could even inhibit Odin's powers. Loki was able to tap into the power of the sword to change Thor into a frog, which, while comical, is supposed to be next to impossible to do since Thor is resistant to magical transformation. Loki also made the entire Asgard population sick, which, again, is supposed to be impossible. The main ability and overall purpose of the sword is the power to cut through anything that the wielder wishes. And by anything, we mean anything physical, spatial, universal, multidimensional, you get the gist. We did get to see it wipe out an entire planet, which, you have to admit, was pretty neat. Let's waste no time talking about our next MCU weapon and how it varied from the comics. This weapon needs no introduction. Does saying it doesn't need an introduction count as an introduction?
Fine. I'll do it myself.
The Infinity Gauntlet gave us some of the coolest fight sequences in the MCU, with its ability to manipulate the energy, reality, and world around it. Wielded by the Mad Titan Thanos, there wasn't much this weapon wasn't capable of, especially when powered by all 6 Infinity Stones. The biggest drawback and difference between the MCU and the comic version of the Gauntlet is that in the MCU, the Gauntlet was dependent on hand or finger motions in order to access the power of the stones, which greatly helped our heroes battle Thanos in Infinity War.
Don't let him close his fist.
In the comics, that gauntlet acted on the will of the wearer and not on physical action. When Adam Warlock donned the gauntlet in the comics, he was able to juggle an entire galaxy. Thanos used the Space Stone to make multiple copies of himself, destroyed a star with the Power Stone, and used the Soul Gem to bring the dead back to life. The stones, called gems in the comics, have individual history as well, and make even low-level enemies universal threats. For example, the Hood once used the Power Gem to go toe-to-toe with the Red Hulk. Something this powerful has to have limitations, or else our heroes wouldn't stand a chance. In the comics, the limitation placed on the Infinity Gauntlet is that it can only be used in the reality it was created in. So, that means a Mad Titan in one reality can't wipe out half of all realities, thankfully. The Cosmic Cube, or the Tesseract in the MCU, is pretty different in the comics compared to what we saw on screen. First and foremost, the Cosmic Cube answers to the will of the being that uses it. The primary ability is wish granting, or an extreme level of reality warping. In the comics, Thanos used the power of a cube to become one with the universe and defeated Kronos. The cube also caused a multiversal chaos that would have destroyed the entire Omniverse. It is said that the cubes are semi-sentient, and even in cube form, it can choose how it wants to be used and will even deny certain wishes. The sentience of the cube would depend on the previous owners, so it could be an evil cube or a good cube. The Ebony Blade was briefly introduced at the end of the Eternals, and it was shimmering like it had its own life, alluding to the fact that it may be a symbiote like the aforementioned Necrosword in the comic universe. Not much is known about the sword in the MCU due to its brief appearance, but it is plenty powerful in the comics. The blade was created from a starstone meteorite, and it was forged to be a worthy opponent to Excalibur. It can cut through practically any object or substance in the universe, except for other enchanted weapons or metal, like adamantium. The blade also possesses a dark force so strong that mortals can't even comprehend unleashing its fullest potential. Some cool parlor tricks the Ebony Blade can do include teleporting its user to its current location, and it can be summoned to the user's location, much like Mjolnir. The blade can even open paths to other dimensions. All of this does come with a stipulation, which is a nice way of saying a curse. Anyone who carries the blade into battle is corrupted and slowly infected by darkness, making them grow increasingly bloodthirsty and violent over time. The curse will bring the user to the brink of their sanity, and the more blood the two spill together causes both to become even more powerful. That is probably why a mysterious off-screen voice asked at the end of the Eternals,
"Sure you're ready for that, Mr. Whitman?"
Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, is a great weapon for the God of Thunder. They are essentially synonymous with one another.
That's more like it.
While we have seen some powerful abilities from Mjolnir in the MCU, it pales in comparison to the comic counterpart. The striking ability in the comic books is extensively stronger than in the MCU. It can pack an incredibly mean punch when launched with purpose. So much so that it has atomized a tank, knocked out the Phoenix Force, and has even destroyed planets with its sheer force. We know that Mjolnir allows Thor to fly, and while we saw that ability often in the MCU, there is no real way to tell how fast he is moving. However, in the comics, we know he can travel faster than the speed of light. Thor and his mighty hammer can travel so fast that they can resist the force of a black hole. Mjolnir is also an amazing conduit for lightning. We have also seen that ability in the MCU, but just like other abilities, it is definitely nerfed. Mjolnir has cracked Jotunheim in half and killed the giant wolf Fenrir. The additional powers that Mjolnir has that the MCU version doesn't have at all are powers like absorbing blasts and channeling that power. It can also drain the life energy of living beings. Comic book Mjolnir can also blast several other elements other than lightning, and also has an insanely powerful ability called the God Blast. All that being said, the version of the mighty hammer we have seen in the MCU is still a weapon I would love to possess, but the power in the comics is in a league all its own.
Still worthy.
Star-Lord's weapon of choice are his infamous quad blasters. While they are awesome, and even caused Chris Pratt to make sound effects with his mouth while filming, a habit he obviously had to break, they aren't as cool as his actual weapon in the comic books. In the comics, Star-Lord rocks a completely different weapon, known as the Element Gun. The Element Gun is quite the upgrade from the space pistols we see in the MCU. If you haven't guessed by now, the Element Gun can shoot all the elements at enemies with ease: fire, water, air, earth, and lightning.
It's never done that before.
Being in control of the different elements can be incredibly useful given the situation or trouble Star-Lord may find himself in. Peter also dismantled the Element Gun several times and even added a voice chip to it. Quill likes to get up to debauchery and all sorts of trouble, and I think the Element Gun would only cause him to get into more mischief, especially if it fell into Drax's hands. Few heroes have a symbol that is as iconic as Captain America and his shield. However, His shield is significantly stronger in the comics than it is in the MCU. For starters, it is made of an entirely different material in the comics that just doesn't exist yet in the MCU, and that material is pro-adamantium. Pro-adamantium consists of vibranium and adamantium, making it capable of withstanding extreme amounts of force and energy blasts. However, despite being composed of stronger metals in the comics, it is not indestructible. Ultron, King Hyperion, and others have broken the shield. If, and hopefully when, adamantium enters the MCU, we will see a revamped version of the shield. Rounding out this list is the Black Widow's bracelet, called the Widow's Bite. The Black Widow is one of the world's deadliest spiders, so it makes sense that Natasha was trained at a very young age to be a deadly super spy.
We're still friends, right?
Like most of her superhero allies, she does have a weapon that is her go-to, and it is worn on her wrist. The Widow's Bite packs a mean punch, as it can unleash an electrostatic charge that acts as a percussive blast. It can also deliver a charge of electricity that ranges from minor shocks to high voltage currents that can be lethal. The comics have a few additional abilities that didn't make an appearance in the MCU. There is an aerosol knockout drug that can render a person unconscious for more than 20 hours. Several explosives are stored inside the bracelet, which is more of a gauntlet in the comics, tear gas pellets, and a radio transmitter that can lock onto a target and track its every move. The MCU does not fall short when talking about incredible weaponry, and there are so many more unexplored or underutilized weapons throughout the comic universe. One can only hope we get to see more of the abilities discussed throughout this video, and hopefully some new items that will make an impact across the multiverse. Which weapon is your favorite? What weapon do you hope to see on screen? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching.